It's 8. All right. Calling Environment and Energy into session. Welcome everyone at this lovely hour of the day. So we're going to do the public hearing first, although I'm going to reverse the order of the bills. And then we'll go into executive session, discuss the bills that we were hoping to exec out today, and then hopefully have our first successful executive session, and then we'll adjourn. So let's get a staff report on 1329, please.
Good morning, Chair Dolio, committee members. Matt Sterling, staff to the committee. House Bill 1329 concerns power purchase agreements and the Clean Energy Transformation Act. Under CETA, electric utilities must eliminate coal-fired resources from their allocation of electricity by December 31st, 2025. For the purposes of the coal elimination standard, a coal-fired resource does not include any electric generation facility that is included as part of a limited duration wholesale power purchase of up to 1 month if the source of the power includes electricity that is unspecified. Current rules adopted by the Department of Commerce require that a utility not engage in a series of combination of short-term transactions for unspecified electricity for the purpose of avoiding the restrictions on use of coal-fired resources under existing law. House Bill 1329 would extend the duration of allowable power purchase agreements from the definition of a coal-fired resource if the source of the power is unspecified. The contract duration limit for such power purchase agreements would increase from 1 month to 3 months and could be for a term of up to 6 months if it is necessary to meet the electric utility's seasonal resource adequacy requirements. The definition of coal-fired resource would also exclude electricity purchased from the Bonneville Power Administration under a long-term power purchase agreement, except for any portion of the electricity that the BPA knows at the time of contracting for the power is from a coal-fired generating unit. Lastly, the bill provides that the requirement that each electric utility eliminate coal-fired resources from its allocation of electricity would not prohibit any electric utility from purchasing or exchanging power from the BPA. That concludes my remarks. Happy to try and answer questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for Matt? Okay, we are honored today to have the first bill intro of our vice chair. Vice Chair Hunt.
Member Dye and members of the committee. The Clean Energy Transformation Act is a bold landmark piece of legislation. It sets the path for our utilities to transform our energy system and decarbonize our economy. And the transformation is complex. The bill before you is a narrowly scoped amendment to the Clean Energy Transformation Act. It came about by conversations and discussions between the Public Generating Pool and the Northwest Energy Coalition over the interim, and really is meant to make sure that our public utilities are able to comply with the Clean Energy Transformation Act and to do their work. Public utilities are serving millions of people across the state of Washington, and they are undergoing this transformation of our energy infrastructure, and this will support them and enable them to do that. It will also help them make sure that they are able to do that, factoring in affordability and reliability of the energy that they are providing. I look forward to working with you all and with stakeholders on improving and strengthening this bill, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions? Oh, could you provide your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Victoria Hunt, and I represent the 5th Legislative District.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's have Bill Clark.
Oh, we have a question.
Oh, we do have a question. Representative Ibarra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for staff, could you
go over the definition of unspecified power for us real quick? Because it's really important to the conversation in this particular bill.
While Matt is looking up that RCW definition, okay.
Yeah, so thank you, Rep. Ibarra. So unspecified electricity is defined in existing law as electricity source for which the fuel attribute is unknown or has been separated from the energy delivered to retail electric consumers. I would note that that definition is not used in the bill, in the language. It's discussing unspecified electricity, but it's not actually using that definition.
Representative Dye.
This is, just to clarify the umbrella on this bill is about dealing with the potential of Bonneville Power having to source coal energy to fill the demand load. Is that what this bill is about? Because it's a hydropower system, but occasionally they have to purchase coal to meet the demand?
Well, it's extending the duration for which they could contract in a power purchase agreement for electricity that is that includes a portion that is undesignated. So that could potentially include a portion that is coal, but it actually excludes from that if they know it is coal. So they're making a power purchase agreement for electricity that includes a portion that is undesignated. The source is undesignated.
Okay, let's have Bill Clark, Logan Barr, and Mary Weinke come forward. No Mary today. Is she remote? Okay.
Good morning, Chair Dolio and Ranking Member Dye. I'm Bill Clark. I'm here for Grant County Public Utility District, here in support of the bill. And Rep. Hunt, we appreciate your sponsorship as well, and Rep. Ibarra. I think I would say this, first to Rep. Dye's question. To be clear, this is not about Bonneville buying coal. This is about ensuring that the state's existing no coal standard can actually be implemented. That standard takes effect in about 11 months. And under current law, it's really not possible for utilities to prove the negative that any unspecified power doesn't have any coal in it. And so the extension from 30 days to 90 days conforms with how utilities typically buy unspecified source power. It also allows the purchase of wholesale power from Bonneville in certain limited circumstances, but to be clear, it's not about buying coal. It's about ensuring that the no coal standard, when it's implemented in 2026, can work. And I think Washington would be one of only 4 or 5 states to have that standard. So we're happy to answer questions. Mary's also here to talk about the bill in more detail. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Logan Barr, State Relations Manager for Tacoma Public Utilities and Tacoma Power, in support of House Bill 1329. We have long supported the Climate Commitment Act and the Clean Energy Transformation Act as vital parts of Washington's climate policy framework. This bill strengthens CETA by clarifying that utilities can purchase unspecified electricity. While the original law allowed such purchases, ambiguity remained about its application and when penalties would apply. This bill provides us with clarity, ensuring that utilities can procure unspecified power under specific, limited circumstances, when included in long-term BPA contracts, when contracts are 90 days or less, or when purchased to comply with the Resource Adequacy Program. Clearly outlining these conditions allows us to confidently meet customer demand through allowed market purchases while upholding CETA's long-term policy goals. We want to get this right. We are appreciative of the stakeholders that are involved in this conversation, including the BPA, NWEC, Climate Solutions, and the Department of Commerce. We look forward to continuing to work with them on perfecting the language. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Let's hear from Mary, who I believe is remote.
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the time today. My name is Mary Linke. I am the Executive Director of the Public Generating Pool, which is a trade association representing 9 of the larger community-owned utilities in Washington State. Actually, 8 of them in Washington and 1 is in Oregon. PGP has long supported the energy transition and CETA's elimination of the state's reliance on coal-fired resources. What we're here today with this bill is really seeking narrow technical changes to enhance its implementability and make sure that we avoid unintended consequences that could unnecessarily expose utility customers to cost and reliability risk. So there's several features of this bill that I want to quickly touch on today that some have already mentioned. One is really easing the implementation costs of this transition by enabling industry standard short-term contracts that are used to hedge against physical supply risk and price volatility, but do not change the prohibition on coal-fired resources. As was already mentioned, we're really talking about unspecified contracts, which don't identify coal as a source. It would create a narrow exception for these types of contracts needed to meet resource adequacy requirements and support utilities joining the Western Resource Adequacy Program. It will also clarify the treatment of preference power purchased from Bonneville Power Administration, again, without compromising the integrity of the law by explicitly prohibiting contracts that are for direct purchases of coal. And as Logan mentioned, also, we have been actively working with the Department of Commerce and other stakeholders on these issues, and will continue to do so to ensure clarification and support of the bill as it proceeds through this process. I am happy to entertain any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. I have a question for you. How much coal is in BPA's portfolio?
So BPA creates a SIM emissions factor to quantify its emissions. And there's no direct coal in BPA's mix, but there are unspecified contracts that BPA uses to balance its system. So it doesn't know, as was already mentioned, we don't know the content of the resources in those contracts, but it's a very small portion of Bonneville's overall system. I want to say less than 0.5% or 0.05%, something like that. It's a very small amount of unspecified transactions that BPA enters into to balance its system.
And then do you foresee that potentially growing in the future in some way?
I think it's very hard to say sitting here today. Bonneville is renegotiating its long-term contracts right now. The new contracts will start in 2028. BPA has identified a need for new resources in that future, but it's unclear at this point what those resources might look like, whether they will actually acquire resources or continue to rely on the market to a greater degree, or whether they'll be able to advance energy efficiency and other types of demand-side solutions. So it's unclear at this point. That's partly why we included in the bill a limit on BPA's ability, or a prohibition on BPA's ability to directly contract for coal, given that level of uncertainty in the future.
And so do you think that sideboard, because if they were actually contracting with a coal resource, then that would be very clear to those regulating under CETA? Is that the supposition there? Okay, thank you very much. I think we have a question from Representative Ibarra and then Representative Lee.
Hi, just a question about your fuel mix. So back in the day, I used to do fuel mix analysis for Grant PUD for years. And I'm guessing all the utilities still have to do it for, I think it's for Commerce or for Ecology. And so that fuel mix, in my understanding, was used to calculate the fuel mix in the state of Washington. I don't know if BPA's fuel mix analysis and generation numbers were used to calculate the fuel mix in the state of Washington because BPA is a Fed. So do you know if BPA was doing a fuel mix analysis with the state of Washington Ecology in the past or now?
So what I do know is that, as I mentioned already, BPA does create effectively an emissions factor for its system, which is very low. And then Bonneville's customers in the state of Washington would use that emissions factor to apply to their purchases from Bonneville. So that is what would end up in kind of the state fuel mix, would actually be reflected in customer fuel mix calculations using Bonneville's system factor or emissions factor for it.
Representative Lee, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Forgive me, new on this, but the way I see this is that this is going to give you, the utilities, added flexibility as suddenly we get a cold wave. Your customers are demanding more electricity, and you say, uh-oh, we're going to have X number of days cold wave. Our customers are going to scream, we need more electricity, so you naturally reach out to BPA. Turn on the generation, and BPA's short-term demand, we need to find it, and it gives them the flexibility to go grab unspecified power that's not defined so that they can meet the needs of your customers. So does this give you added flexibility to meet the needs of your customers? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, I think that's right. I think I would just characterize it slightly differently, which is to say it gives utilities the flexibility that they need to plan for those events more effectively and reduce the impact of them when they happen. So you are able to purchase those 3-month term contracts that can lock in a price and hedge against the price volatility that occurs during those events. As I'm sure you know, during those kinds of scarcity events, the kind of spot market prices skyrocket. So this enables utilities to enter into contracts that would prevent them from being as impacted by those price spikes. And then it also enables those 6-month contracts for resource adequacy purposes so that you have that firm supply. And under the resource adequacy requirements, that supply has to be firm physical supply and also backed up by firm transmission. So it's highly reliable product. So it really enables that flexibility to protect against those kinds of events. Again, without compromising kind of the strict prohibition on direct purchases of coal.
And how much unspecified energy is BPA bringing in now? And would this potentially have a incentivize more unspecified energy coming in?
That is speculative, and I would really want Bonneville to be the one to speculate on its own practices. I don't see this as incentivizing additional unspecified purchases, in particular for Bonneville, who really, it does its, buying and selling on behalf of a large multi-state system. So this Washington policy won't necessarily incentivize different behavior for them, but will enable them to continue the current practices. And same with other utilities. Kind of this is enabling kind of a standard industry product that many utilities typically use for hedging and resource adequacy purposes.
And the first part of the question was, how much unspecified do they bring in now?
Oh, it's very small. Again, I would want to pull up the actual data. I'm sure it's publicly available. But as I mentioned, I think it's 0.02% or something like that. It's very, very small amount.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Let's see if we could have Glenn Blackman and Leah Missick are here in person, and then it looks like Charlie Thompson and Stephanie Johnson, if we could have them on deck remotely. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning. I'm Glenn Blackman, Director of the Energy Policy Office at the State Department of Commerce. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on this bill. We've been working closely with the proponents and other stakeholders to figure out a couple of issues with it related to the implementation of the bill. The first one of those has to do with a term in the resource adequacy element of the bill in Section 1 where it says the contract has to be necessary for the utilities' participation in that program. We are a little concerned about the ability to understand after the fact whether something was necessary or not. And so we think it'd be easier to implement with a slightly different wording there. I don't think that's going to be a big issue to figure out. The second concern has to do with the blanket exemption that's provided to power from BPA in Section 2. We feel like this is in direct conflict with the provision in Section 1 that has a narrowly tailored exemption for BPA power that makes sure that if they purchase coal-fired power directly, that would not be allowed under the no coal standard. And so the blanket exemption in Section 2 creates a conflict that we believe would make the law difficult to implement. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, Chair Dolio, members of the committee. Leah Missick here with Climate Solutions, testifying as other. Climate Solutions was heavily involved in the passage of the Clean Energy Transformation Act, and it was analyzed by a number of energy experts on how it would put us on a path to 100% clean electricity while also ensuring grid reliability, energy affordability, and good jobs here in Washington. So we are extremely, extremely invested in the success of this policy. We are happy to discuss updates as the law is implemented and as we get new information. But now we think there are unintended consequences that haven't been fully thought through yet, and we've just begun discussions. One of the changes in this bill that was just mentioned, we think would create a bigger loophole for coal-fired electricity coming into the state if it was purchased from BPA. And for us, this raises significant red flags, especially given the change in federal administration, given BPA is a federal agency. This is a change to the law that could have significant ramifications, both substantively and in terms of what it signals. So we look forward to further discussions with the bill sponsor and other committee members on ways to make sure that energy rates stay affordable, we have grid reliability, and we also achieve the goals of this critical fundamental law. So thank you to Rep. Hunt for continuing to work with us and committing to do so. Thank you.
Any questions for Glenn or Leah? Representative Rammel.
Thank you, Chair Beth. Question, Glenn, if you could help. One thing I'm kind of curious about when the utilities, if a utility were to violate the no coal standard, what's sort of the consequence of that? How does that work out in terms of penalties?
There's a penalty provision in CETA that's stated in a dollar amount per megawatt hour of electricity that they use that is not consistent with the statute. So it's a per megawatt hour number.
You may not have the number right in front of you, but just broadly speaking, how does that compare to the cost of that megawatt hour? Is it an order of magnitude bigger than the cost of buying that power somewhere else? How does, or if you don't know off the top of your head, happy to take it off.
If a utility were violating CETA every hour over the course of the year, the penalty number would be quite a bit higher than kind of what the average cost of electricity is over the course of the year. It's probably 2 or 3 times as much. But if the violation occurs during a peak period, say someone decided that they would use coal power despite the prohibition during a period of really tight demand, the market price for electricity at that point could be easily 10 times as high as the penalty amount.
Okay, seeing no further questions, let's move to remote with Charlie Thompson and followed by Stephanie Johnson.
Good morning, Chair Dolio and members of the committee. My name is Charlie Thompson. I'm a policy associate with the Northwest Energy Coalition, NWEC. This bill provides some targeted technical changes to the coal phase-out provision of CETA, the requirement for utilities to phase out owned coal facilities and specified coal purchases of any length remains unchanged by this legislation and will be in effect at the end of this year. This bill addresses a narrow issue concerning the treatment of short-term unspecified purchases under CETA, as we know, where the source of the electricity cannot be determined. We agree with some of the concerns expressed by utilities that current practices appear to increase the cost of compliance compared to lower cost contracts with slightly longer terms that achieve the same environmental outcomes. Given the pressures on utility customer bills and the importance of maintaining affordability under CETA, we think this bill is a reasonable solution to an unforeseen CETA implementation issue, which does not undermine the intent of the law. The reason we have signed in other instead of support is simply because we cannot know for certain what resources the Bonneville Power Administration will procure to serve its customers after 2028. Washington utilities say they need more certainty that their long-term power contracts with BPA will not violate Washington law, and we share the same desire for more certainty that BPA's resource mix will be consistent with CETA's clean energy standards. Despite the overall uncertainty at this moment, we believe that the risk is quite low that BPA will procure coal power, given the effects of incorporating Washington's carbon price into economic dispatch models and the availability of lower-cost, cleaner supply options. Therefore, the bill does not raise any new concerns for us that are not already inherent in CETA's underlying treatment of BPA's system. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to Stephanie Johnson.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Chair Dolio, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Stephanie Johnson. I'm a strategic advisor in the Power Supply Business Unit at Seattle City Light, testifying in favor of HB 1329 concerning wholesale power purchases under CETA. Seattle City Light is honored to have actively supported the ambitious decarbonization policies adopted by the state of Washington over the past several sessions, and we appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on the discussion regarding the proposed revision to this important law. To meet our customers' energy needs, City Light relies on a portfolio of resources that includes our own hydroelectric resources as well as contracts for power. A critical piece of this portfolio is a long-term contract with the Bonneville Power Administration, which provides approximately 40% of the energy we use to serve our customers. The primary sources of generation in BPA's resource mix are federal hydroelectric dams in the Northwest. A small portion of BPA's energy mix is comprised of unspecified energy, which is used to balance resources and meet its customers' demands beyond what the federal system can provide. HB 1329 provides a narrow technical fix that provides clarity to City Light and BPA's other utility customers in Washington regarding treatment of our BPA purchase under the coal elimination standard in CETA. This revision will inform our compliance strategies regarding what documentation we provide to the Department of Commerce. It'll also help to avoid unintended consequences that could create additional costs for customers. Thank you for this opportunity to work on this issue, and we're strongly committed to achieving the 100% clean electric utilities sector in Washington.
Thank you, Stephanie. It looks like you have a very cute dog, by the way.
There's two of them here. I had to bribe them.
Okay, any questions for Stephanie before we adjourn this hearing or close this hearing? Okay, there it is, cute, right? Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we will close this hearing. Okay, let's open the hearing on 1303 with a briefing from Jacob.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Jacob Lipson, staff to the committee. House Bill 1303 addresses environmental justice in government decision-making. I'm going to start with a few bits of pertinent background to this bill. So first, the State Environmental Policy Act provides a process for lead government agencies to consider environmental impacts of government action, and it can condition or to deny that action based on that consideration of environmental impacts. Lead agencies under SEPA can be either a state agency or a local government. A key juncture in the SEPA process is when a lead agency makes what is known as a threshold determination as to whether a full environmental impact statement is needed or whether a proposed action will not have significant environmental impacts that can be mitigated. SEPA requires consideration of various types of environmental impacts, but does not currently explicitly require consideration of environmental justice. Separately, under the 2021 Healthy Environment for All Act, or Senate Bill 5141, certain state agencies are required to take specific actions to consider environmental justice in various aspects of their government decision-making and budgeting, including carrying out an environmental justice assessment associated with certain significant agency actions. Predating the HEAL Act, but then amended and being maintained by the HEAL Act in 2021 was an environmental health disparities map that the Department of Health is now charged explicitly with maintaining. So turning now to the bill in front of you, there are three main components of it that I'm going to touch on. First, under the State Clean Air Act, in communities ranking as a 9 or 10, which are the highest rankings in the environmental health disparities map, ecology and local air authorities that issue construction permits, notice of construction order of approvals to new air sources or modified air sources would be prohibited from issuing those permits for certain large facilities that either would require a prevention of significant deterioration permit, an air operating permit, or are incinerators in those communities. So there would be a statutory prohibition on the issuance of Clean Air Act permits in those communities to those specific types of facilities. Second, under the State Environmental Policy Act, ecology would be required to adopt rules to include environmental justice as an element that's basically addressed in SEPA, including through inclusion among the elements of the environment that are currently considered under SEPA, and as part of the checklist that's used by project proponents in determining and making that threshold determination that I was describing. And third, House Bill 1303 requires SEPA lead agencies to carry out an environmental justice impact statement for certain potentially impactful projects in certain pollution-burdened communities and those adjacent to such communities. Potentially impactful projects are defined to include projects that need certain types of solid waste handling, air or water permits, and certain other types of facilities. And it explicitly includes certain types of facilities such as clean energy facilities. Likewise, pollution-burdened communities in this bill are described as those ranked 7 or higher in the environmental health disparities map, or those adjacent to them. The environmental justice impact statement would need to be carried out prior to a SEPA threshold determination. Lead agencies would need to follow a specified process in carrying out that environmental justice impact statement, including holding a public hearing, taking public input, and then the EGIS would need to address a number of specified criteria related to the community in which the proposed project would take place, and the project's potential human health and environmental impacts. And then based on that environmental justice impact statement, the lead agency would either have the ability to mitigate or to deny a proposed action on the basis of environmental justice impacts identified in that environmental justice impact statement, consistent with existing SEPA authority. Lead agencies would also be authorized to require a project proponent to reimburse the agency for costs associated with the environmental justice impact statement. And just for clarity's sake, this environmental justice impact statement is separate from and in addition to any environmental justice assessment requirements under the 2021 HEAL Act. So covered a lot of ground. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Fye.
Thank you, Chair Dolio. Could you elaborate a bit on what projects would be included in this? And I guess my question would be whether this would apply to any construction of highways.
So it's a good question. This is sort of a three-part bill. So depending on which part of the bill you're talking about, different categories of actions would fall into it. So for purposes of the Clean Air Act prohibition, it's a narrower slice of facilities that would be covered by the statutory prohibition. Incinerators and those requiring an air operating permit, which are major sources of air emissions, things like major industrial facilities. On the other hand, the first section of the bill that just makes environmental justice part of the SEPA process, that would apply to all government decisions for which SEPA is done. And there are a long list of exclusions for things that don't have to go through the SEPA process in existing law. But anything that does go through the existing SEPA process, the environmental justice impact statement or the environmental justice inclusion in SEPA would apply there. And then for the third part that I was describing, the environmental justice impact statement, that would apply to certain types of facilities. Among them could be either projects with transportation impacts or transportation projects themselves. There is an explicit exclusion for Department of Transportation projects below a certain cost threshold. I think it's $15 million, but I'd need to refresh myself. But I think it was set consistent with the exclusion under the HEAL Act. There are certain Department of Transportation projects that are excluded from HEAL as well below a capital dollar threshold. It's either $12 or $15 million, and I think it's the same.
It's 15.
Thank you.
So I take it that the answer is yes, then.
It could apply to specific. If the question was specifically about Department of Transportation projects, I think it could apply to some.
Thank you.
Representative Dye.
Thank you, Chair Dolio. So, Rep. Minna, I have a couple of questions. One is last year's bill, it covered communities 7 that were impacted from level 7.
Oh, she hasn't actually done her bill intro yet.
Oh, I'm.
But Jacob can answer questions.
Yeah, if you'd like Jacob to answer it. Or you want to
no, she
directly?
wants to grill me. Perfect.
All right.
I mean, I'm all on it. I mean, I'm ready.
Prepared for my grilling. Let me just introduce the bill real quick.
I won't do that.
Should I proceed?
Please.
Well, thank you, Chair Dolio and Ranking Member Dye. I look forward to your questions. And thank you to fellow members of the Environment and Energy Committee for hearing this bill today, House Bill 1303, affectionately referred to as the Curb Pollution Act. As you know, I'm Charlotte Minna, State Representative for the 29th District. And the bill before you today is about recognizing the harm that pollution has caused people and working to change course. I represent a hardworking district with high rates of poverty and in many areas, limited access to transportation and healthcare facilities. And to put a finer point on it, one of the school districts in the 29th serves families where nearly 80% qualify for free and reduced lunch. What's more, families in my district live in some of the most polluted areas in Washington. The Washington Tracking Network's Environmental Health Disparities Map, which you just heard about, assigns every census tract in Washington a number from 1 to 10, 10 being the most polluted. In the 29th district, the vast majority of those census tracts are ranked 9 and 10. So what does this mean for us? It's been reported by the News Tribune that people in Parkland, in my district, have an average life expectancy that is 10 years less than other residents of Pierce County. Environmental pollution contributes to this outcome. And by the way, you already know there are overburdened communities all across the state of Washington. People live where they can afford to live. Heavy industrial areas, often cheaper to live in because of the damaging side effects, are usually home to lower income communities. I think it's wrong that your income level should dictate your life expectancy. As you heard, this bill requires a closer look at projects coming to heavily polluted neighborhoods, and it presents an opportunity to incentivize the kind of projects that we do want in our neighborhoods, to bring clean energy, sustainable jobs to these areas. Too often, communities are given the false choice between their health and their economic well-being, but we can have both. I believe that we can bring healthy family wage jobs to overburdened neighborhoods, and we can even create more work opportunities through mitigation efforts. I want to acknowledge that this bill is ambitious and it's hard. This presents the first time, this presents the first time that we are asking government to look at cumulative or compounded effects of pollution and other environmental impacts on people. And we've never done this before. But the way that we have always done things does not work. It leads to the status quo that we have today, where we have folks living in the shadow of industry with shorter life expectancies. So you may not be surprised to know that I've already received a very healthy amount of feedback from folks that stand to be impacted by this policy. And I do want to make it clear to this committee that my intention is to continue working with folks. This is not a new bill. It was introduced last year, and I will continue working with everyone to ensure that we can continue to improve the bill. And with that, Representative Dye, you look ready. I am ready to take questions.
Representative Dye.
Thank you, Rep. Mena. Appreciate your kindness. So a couple of questions. Last year's bill included communities that are impacted from level 7, 8, 9, and 10. And you narrowed the bill to 9 and 10. That's the first question I have, and then I'll follow up with a second question.
I'm going to have our attorney answer this.
For the record, I'm not an attorney. I'm just staff. But the first part of the bill that I described that relates to Clean Air Act statutory prohibitions applies only in areas 9 and 10. For environmental justice impact statements, it is 7 and above. So two different standards for the two different parts of the bill.
Thank you, Jacob. He never forgets anything. It's a miracle.
It is true. Did you have a follow-up?
I do have a follow-up.
Okay, follow-up.
So it's back to environmental justice. And this is something that's bothered me about the HILL Act greatly. As why is it that the clean energy projects are not considered potentially an impactful project for environmental justice? You know, why exclude wind and solar when we're looking at scale industrialization of open spaces and wildlands and farmlands in areas that the median incomes are half of what they are in the urban areas, where life expectancy among farmers is 15 years less than the average population? And so why is it that we don't see renewable energy industrialization, renewable energy factories on our lands, tribal lands, impactful in this form of environmental injustice? Why would we exclude tribes and rural communities?
I appreciate the question, Representative Dye, and I can speak to why I wrote the bill in this way and what my intention was. So we can see a direct link between air pollution or certain types of emissions and health outcomes. So when we look at, for example, the environmental health disparities map, we know that they have 19 indicators in there that look at different things from particulate matter and different kinds of pollution. And we can make a direct link between certain types of facilities that will result in more emissions and continuing to sort of build that cumulative impact of pollution. I don't see air pollution emissions from, say, a windmill. And so I'm focused really on what I believe we have underpinning scientifically, legally, and on a policy basis to tackle those things.
Representative Barno.
So, I mean, one thing I think you said early on in your description of the policy, and I agree with, is that, you know, financial security is directly linked to health outcomes, right, and life expectancy. I don't see a fiscal note on this, but do we expect that additional layers of consideration in, for instance, like SEPA would increase the costs of projects or delay projects, and that then eventually that gets passed down to taxpayers, many who are going to reside in some of these burdened communities?
So I'm not sure that I can make the direct link between the permitting process and how that may impact taxpayers. I will say that, you know, I want to acknowledge that with an additional layer of review and, you know, giving it 90 days for an EJIS, Environmental Justice Impact Statement, we are adding a little bit of time to the process, and we are asking folks to look a little bit closer at the impacts on community. It's not prescriptive in the bill, you know, saying this is exactly what an analysis would look like. I think we're leaving that to agencies, and I have received a lot of feedback from builders and project proponents that are seeking sort of a better integration of the EJIS into the current process, and I'm certainly willing and able to look at that. But I don't have really any information on how agency, you know, SEPA lead agencies, whether they're local governments or a state agency like ecology, may impact a tax base. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it would probably be something more anecdotal, that the more layers of I guess, regulations or the more things that you have to analyze would delay a project or maybe increase costs. So it's probably more anecdotal than anything. So
Okay.
I appreciate it. Yeah,
Thanks.
Representative Ibarra.
Thinking probably the questions to staff more than it is to Representative Mena, but thank you for the presentation. Did a great job. Question is, I think we saw the map of all the communities that were burdened, and in my community, we've got Mattawa and George on that map. And living out there, and for my whole life, there is no smokestacks out there. So I'm guessing the equation used to identify those locations had a big, or the types of communities, Mattawa and George, which is probably 95% poverty and 95% Hispanic, had a big factor in making those communities part of that map, but without any pollution that I can see other than a 2-lane highway going through Mattawa and I-90 going through George. So is the factor for those communities, is it based upon largely on the type of communities that we're seeing?
Thanks, Representative Barr. So a couple of things there. One, just to clarify, and they're related and rely on related terms, but the map that was presented that I think you're referring to at a recent work session is the map of overburdened communities, specifically with respect to air pollution, that the Department of Ecology produces using the Environmental Health Disparities Map. It's a similar sort of output, but it's specifically for air pollution overburdened communities. And that's something they are obligated to do under the Climate Commitment Act in a manner consistent with the 2021 HEAL Act, but not. But that's actually sort of a distinct map. The Environmental Health Disparities Map that's referenced in this bill that takes into account 19 specified inputs. Some of those are environmental factors, so like, specifically looking at, for example, particulate matter, I think is one of the 19 criteria. And then, and I think diesel exposures is another of the 19 criteria. So various facets of air pollution. And then there are also socioeconomic factors that are inputs into that map as well. And I guess I'd say, I can't say why any one community is ranked highly on that map without sort of we'd need to do a deep dive sort of on what went into the output calculations for each specific community for the Environmental Health Disparities Map.
Representative Mena would like to respond.
Yeah, I will respond briefly because Representative Ibarra anticipated this question. I wouldn't be any good at what I do if I didn't know what you were already going to ask me. So we did receive a response from the Department of Ecology, and I want to make clear to acknowledge what Jacob said. We are talking about the health disparities map, but that was sort of consulted and included and incorporated in what the Department of Ecology produced, as well as EJ Screen, which comes from the US EPA and has some demographic indexes as well. But what they said is that there are elevated levels of air pollution in the area from outdoor burning, agricultural tilling, dust from roads, and livestock. So there are sources of air pollution that don't come necessarily from a smokestack. Thank you.
I've got some questions over here. Representative Kloba.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to this 90-day environmental justice impact report, is that something that has to happen after some of the other permitting activities like SEPA and all those other reviews, or is it something that could be happening concurrently?
The EJIS is incorporated into the SEPA checklist. So it happens early on in the SEPA process before an environmental impact statement.
So we're not necessarily tacking 90 days onto the current sort of time frame for permitting necessarily.
I guess not necessarily. It would have to be completed within 90 days. I guess it would depend on how robust the assessment turns out to be, which again is not prescriptive, and we would rely on an agency with expertise to help us come up with. So, I want to acknowledge that it could add some time to the process. I don't think we're talking years, but I think that we are, in fact, asking people to take a closer look at what are the impacts on folks.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. All right, I think, do we have another? Okay, Representative Clicker, and then we'll move to public testimony to get her off the stand.
I would like to take all the questions.
Thank you, Chair Dolio, and thank you, Representative Mena. So, being in the area you live in, with a lot of skyscrapers, a lot of different things going on in factories that may put out the pollution. Being in Eastern Washington, we have wind farms everywhere, and there's a proposed wind farm that's going to be the largest in the area. And wind farms, wind turbines actually can act as lightning rods. They can also stir up the dust even more. So would a added wind farm, we already have wind farms within 2 miles of a large community, would that be considered, could that be considered an overburdened community as well with what we're dealing with?
So I will answer that to the best of my ability, and then I will look to Jacob, not our attorney, but our staff. And so it is my understanding of the way that we've written the bill that because we're adding an environmental justice impact statement to the SEPA checklist, every project that would have to go through SEPA would need to look at the impacts. We are asking for a cumulative analysis for communities that are ranked 7 or higher. So you could say that this will be considered for any project that has a SEPA, but there will be a closer look at the cumulative impacts if the wind farms were in a community that was ranked 7 or higher. Is that correct?
Yes, basically that's how I'd answer it, except that the bill uses the term environmental justice impact statement specifically to describe the sort of more thorough analysis that would need to be carried out in those communities that are 7 or higher. The portion that affects existing SEPA and just adds environmental justice to the SEPA elements of the environment and checklist that's basically all it does. So it just says that environmental justice needs to be considered for anything that SEPA would apply to.
Quick follow-up.
Thank you. Jacob, might be towards you. So would or historically have wind farms or even solar farms been added to that and have those thoughts? Because sometimes they're not included if you're looking at the fires and lightning and some of those things.
I think for the siting of new wind farms, universally there's a look at environmental impacts under SEPA. Sometimes that's done as part of the FSEC review process, when FSEC's being used to site a facility. But and there is no exclusion for clean energy projects from the consideration of environmental justice as part of SEPA. That's a broadly applicable provision.
Okay, Representative Dye, last one.
So for you, Jacob, following on to that line of thinking, for example, when you are looking at cumulative impacts, thanks for clarifying that this is specifically environmental justice for SEPA, specifically no exclusions for renewable energy. So you're looking at a community that already has significant numbers of acres of wind and some solar permitted, and then you're going to add in a landmass that's somewhat small, very low population, but very low income people that would fit in the environmental justice numbers you're talking about and impacted anyway. So that'd be 250,000 new acres. So the they're going to, in FSEC, they're going to permit site by site. So each one of those would be like a 30 to 60,000 build. They wouldn't be looking at the totality of all the permits in that location for an environmental justice, or would they?
So again, the bill has 2 sections amending the State Environmental Policy Act. One of them exempts clean energy projects, including wind farms. One does not. The one that exempts wind farms and other clean energy projects is the one that requires specifically the cumulative impact analysis, including the environmental justice impact statement. And so I don't think in those cases you would be looking at the cumulative impacts in the way that's prescribed in the environmental justice impact statement section of the bill. But the section of the bill that says you have to consider environmental justice alongside other elements of the environment in the same way that applies to current SEPA analysis, this would be both as part of the threshold determination and as part of any environmental impact statement that would apply. But it's not prescriptive. That section is not prescriptive as to how the cumulative impacts are being looked at, if that helps clarify.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm very sad this is coming to an end. Thank you.
Vice Chair Hunt to call the first panel and those on deck.
Thank you, Chair Dolio. Our first panel will be Guillermo Rogel, Nico Wedekind, and Mia Ayala Marshall.
And on deck?
On deck, if we could have Ione Jones, and then J.C. Harris and Eric Gonzalez.
I'm going to put 90 seconds on, and then if we are running short of time, which I am certain we will, we'll go to 60. But we'll start with 90.
I had a 2-minute testimony prepared and a 1-minute one. I don't have a 90-second one.
I'm sorry, Guillermo. Good luck.
I'm with Front and Centered. With the leadership of the legislature, we've defined overburdened communities and environmental justice into state law. While that work continues in laws like the HEAL Act and the Climate Commitment Act, overburdened communities face entrenched health disparities. Shorter life expectancies, higher rates of asthma and cardiovascular disease stemming from decades of harmful environmental policies and pollution. The data compiled by your dedicated staff are more than just statistics. These are real stories by real community members. The legislation before you today was shaped by frontline voices who experience environmental racism. This bill would center the lived experience of frontline communities, while applicants for air quality, soil, and other permits would need to consider existing cumulative impacts on overburdened communities. This would empower the state to evaluate and mitigate additional harms. As you will hear, the CURB Act addresses some concerns raised by residents across the entire state. It's disheartening that heavily polluting facilities continue to be built in already overburdened communities, but help is on the way through policies like HB1303. We support investment and jobs in our communities, just not at the expense of community health and dignity. Jobs and growth should align with the transition to a clean and just economy. This bill is both necessary and achievable, and we'll continue working with all stakeholders to build a future that values all human life and ensures fairness and protects the well-being of all Washington residents. Thank you.
Hi all, my name is Nico Wedekind and I'm here on behalf of the Front and Centered Coalition. As you've already heard, House Bill 1303 seeks to incorporate a cumulative impact analysis into the permitting process for a limited number of permits issued in Washington state. Cumulative impacts, put simply, are the combined environmental exposures a community experiences. Cumulative impact analysis is the quantification of those exposures, taking into account population characteristics such as socioeconomic factors that may influence how various environmental and public health stressors affect community health or community members' health, well-being, and quality of life. Looking at cumulative impacts from the community level, we can see that there are disparities in the level of exposure across different populations and multiple factors that are leading to these disparities across the state. In this sense, cumulative impact analysis is concerned with addressing the root causes of environmental health disparities. This is not a new concept. House Bill 1303 builds on similar laws passed in New York and New Jersey, as well as policies in Colorado, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Connecticut that understand that pollution in the air, water, and waste, combined with social determinants of health, have a cumulative impact on communities. With your support, we have an opportunity to join these states in advancing a more equitable and fair review process for permitting projects by listening to the voices of Washingtonians who continue to be burdened by the pollution impacts of these proposed facilities. We urge you to pass this bill out of committee. Thanks.
We could next have Mia and Ione.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Chair Dolio, Vice Chair Hunt, Sponsor Mena, and members of the committee. My name is Mia Ayala Marshall, and I represent the Duwamish River Community Coalition, an organization seeking to elevate the voices of community members in South Seattle's Duwamish Valley who experience stark cumulative health disparities due to multiple environmental injustices. Under current laws, environmental permits that allow industries to pollute do not adequately consider the disproportionate and cumulative burdens that communities like mine face due to a legacy of environmental racism. These cumulative health burdens include a life expectancy that is 8 years shorter than the Seattle average and 13 years less than wealthier neighborhoods like Laurelhurst and North Seattle. And we have the highest rates of childhood asthma hospitalizations in the county. Every day, I go to work in the Duwamish Valley and see firsthand these impacts. I've seen Youth Corps members absent from activities due to hospitalization from an asthma attack the night before, coworkers who live in the valley whose children have asthma, and I personally know several community members who have respiratory illnesses and have been diagnosed with cancer who come to us and ask us for help. It is for my community that I'm here today to advocate for House Bill 1303. In the Duwamish Valley, as well as being home to dozens and dozens of industrial operations, there are 7 Title V air permits, the Port of Seattle, 2 international airports, 1 interstate highway, 2 state highways, 2 Superfund sites, etc. All of these aforementioned impacts lead to further exposure to pollution from toxins, which add to our cumulative health impacts. Your report is essential. Thank you.
Are there any questions for this panel? Okay. Oh, Representative Mendoza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm learning a lot of new terms here in Olympia that I've never heard. You mentioned environmental racism. Can you tell me what you mean by environmental racism?
Yeah, this is really based off of the historic redlining, where different communities were zoned for either industry or folks that could not purchase homes. And these areas typically have higher levels of industry that are concentrated there. And that means it's cheaper to pollute. And as Representative Mena was saying, you live where you could afford to live. So these places that have these high levels of pollution, high levels of industry, just it's long histories of racism plus environmental policies. Though that combined, that harmful effect has what we're now calling health disparities. This discrepancy between Laurelhurst and South Park, that in itself is environmental racism. And these are decisions that were made by legislatures before you, but now that we are on a different path towards environmental justice and a just transition, we can move away from those kinds of policies and harmful facilities that have these long-standing history of environmental racism in Washington. And it's not just limited to here, to Washington State, but really all over the nation. Yeah, and just to even go further on that, and transportation projects like highways sometimes rip right through communities of color, and it's because they face the least amount of opposition in those cases. And highways, just that project alone, adds a ton of exposure to different kinds of diesel emissions, particulate matter, that has an effect on people's health. And that's a choice that previous legislatures have made.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Hunt.
If we could have Ione Jones, and then on deck, J.C. Harris and Eric Gonzalez. Thank you.
Good morning, House Environment and Energy Committee, Chair Diago, Vice Chair Hunt, Sponsor Mena, and members of the committee. My name is Ione Jones, representing Chimshtanik, a tribal grassroots organization seeking to change the systems affecting the lower Snake River Palouse and member of the Front and Center Coalition. Chimshtanik and its partners actively support Indigenous rights by engaging in community-based outreach and education to address air quality challenges which disproportionately impact Indigenous communities. Promoting traditional ecological knowledge, such as the use of native plants for medicinal use, soil filtration, and regeneration, aligning with cultural and historical practices. Collaborating with other grassroots organizations in the state of Washington to implement strategies from climate action plans focusing on clean air, wildfire smoke management, and sustainable resource use. The Curb Pollution Act would build on progress enabled by laws like the HEAL Act by incorporating environmental justice concerns in state policymaking, investments in planning, and by addressing the disproportionate impact of pollution at the source. The result will be improved in health, environmental protection, and quality of life in the areas that have suffered the most, and benefits for everyone in Washington state. In the Yakima Valley, there is a focus on particular matter PM 2.5, but there are many more issues that residents deal with. Large dairy farms create smells that can affect large areas and travel with the winds. Washington beef also produces a pungent aroma that is all too familiar to local residents.
If you could wrap up your comments, I would appreciate it.
The agriculture sector contributes many other negative factors depending on the time of year. Thank you for your support.
Thank you so much.
J.C. Harris, and also if Eric Gonzalez.
Eric, please proceed.
Good morning, Chair Dolio, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Eric Gonzalez Alfaro. I'm the lobbyist, not a lawyer, for Earth Justice, testifying in support of 1303. Earth Justice engaged on the New Jersey and New York policies that have been signed into law and have been closely working with front and centered on the bill before you. We believe that this bill is consistent with the progress the legislature has made to recognize environmental justice in state policymaking, investments, and planning is a priority by addressing the disproportionate impact of pollution at the sources. As we know, preventative care is key in other policy spaces, and this bill exemplifies how that philosophy, backed by data and analysis, can also benefit the environment and communities throughout Washington state. This is an environmental justice bill that deserves much attention. Yes, the legislature in our state has come a long way from past policies and practices where, for example, entire communities were uprooted to make way for major highway and other infrastructure projects, though we must ensure that these communities prosper and not continue to bear the negative secondary impacts of today's global commerce and local economies. We commend this bill and ask for your support and look forward to working with everyone on this bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. J.C.?
Good morning. My name is J.C. Harris. I'm from Des Moines. I represent Sea-Tac Noise.info, over 1,400 near-port community residents. We support HB 1303. Sea-Tac Airport is currently undergoing the largest expansion in its history, somewhat ironically referred to as the Sustainable Airport Master Plan. The SAMP will increase flight operations by a third in the near term and more after. A third more flights creates a third more noise and a third more pollution. Unfortunately, people do not see the airport for what it is, the second largest air polluter in the state of Washington. You can prove that by looking at the EJ map. We are a 9 and a 10. From the point of view of the environment, the airport is just a very large factory. Current permitting provides no consideration for the surrounding areas or any long-term community impacts. We have been punished by the dramatic increase in flights. HB 1303 is a common sense first step to addressing the enormous gap in permitting and acknowledging the reason why we're EJ communities in the first place. Hopefully, this will allow us to finally be able to take a meaningful step forward and obtain a modicum of the justice currently denied in state land use law. Thank you.
Thank you, J.C. Questions? Seeing no questions, we'll move to the next panel.
Thank you. I'd like to call forward Carly Michaels, Peter Godlowski, and Kelsey Hulse, and on deck, Scott Hazelgrove, Drew Zabrowski, and Ian Morris.
Good morning. My name is Carly Michaels. I am the Director of Environmental Policy at the Washington Public Ports Association, representing 75 port districts across the state. Ports are economic drivers connecting communities to global markets, creating good-paying jobs, and investing in economic and environmental improvements. I signed in con today on HB 1303 as written because it impacts that mission. While we strongly support the intent of environmental justice and addressing cumulative impacts, we find this to be duplicative and burdensome for our port members working on these projects. We believe these goals can be integrated into SEPA without creating a separate additional process. I want to highlight three main concerns. I sent you our longer testimony, so you have that in detail. First, prohibiting the consideration of economic benefit. Economic benefits such as job creation, infrastructure improvements, and community growth are a part of a project's full value. Socioeconomic factors can uplift pollution-burdened areas and contribute to thriving, healthy, resilient communities. Second, it has been mentioned, this will create project delays. Third, financial burdens. We all know there are costs and delays. However, this will be an additional cost for ports in doing this separate process. There are a lot of conversations ongoing in the state about permitting challenges. We hope to find ways to incorporate the goal of environmental justice much more efficiently into what we already have. Thank you for your consideration.
We'll come back to it. Peter?
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Dolio, members of the committee. For the record, Peter Godlewski with the Association of Washington Business, also signed in con this morning. We'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the concerns we have about the scope of this bill. We don't see this as applying to just large industrial permits. We see this applying to all permittees within the state and the impacted areas, which if you look at the map online covers mostly up from Renton as far south as Olympia. Any permit listed in the bill lists any permit that includes upgrades, new permits, or also renewal of those existing permits. So if a project was going to be undergoing some like a carbon scrubber or other sorts of mitigation technologies would trigger both an environmental justice assessment and then also have to go through the SEPA process. So we're concerned that this as our colleague spoke to, creates some delays. We're also concerned that this also requires you to have to go through the EGI before you're going through SEPA, rather than having to go through the SEPA process, figure out whether your project has a determination of significance or no significance, and then conducting a thorough EIS, of which many of the elements are considered are already within the existing EIS process. And finally, I want to touch on the map too. There were some questions about that. The Washington Health Disparities Map is a reflection of the risk of health outcomes as opposed to measuring the actual on-the-ground health situation. So the map itself is more of a risk assessment tool than actually showing what the on-the-ground conditions are. So I will stop now.
Kelsey?
Good morning, Chair Dolio, Ranking Member Dye, and members of the committee. My name is Kelsey Hulse, and I'm here today on behalf of the Washington Association of Counties. We're deeply supportive of the underlying intent of HB 1303 and appreciate the sponsor's work to center environmental justice in the broader legislative and regulatory landscape. However, as you all know, details matter. So I'd like to share a couple of the details that led us to oppose the bill today. In Section 3 Sub 9, we're concerned about the language prohibiting incorporating economic factors into lead agency decision making. Of course, every project or policy decision necessitates an analysis of benefits and drawbacks. Removing economic benefits from this conversation may lead us to something that doesn't look like justice at all. Labor organizations, civil rights leaders, and organizations like the NRDC have taught us the importance of economic justice and that economic vulnerability exacerbates negative health outcomes in impacted communities. The justice we seek is both multidimensional and intersectional. We would be happy to provide more detailed feedback, but we have a larger ask. We would ask that the sponsor consider bringing together the many stakeholders that care very much about this issue in the interim to explore how best to make environmental justice not just an item on a checklist, but a guiding principle for how we build and plan our communities. We are eager to stand as an ally and partner in this effort. Thank you.
Rep. Mena?
I'm going to be very brief, Chair Dolio, but I would like to ask if I could, because there's been a lot of genuine confusion about what the economic benefit part applies to and does not apply to. Would it be okay if Jacob just provided that clarification?
Jacob?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think I need to maybe provide a written input on that I can send out to the committee after the hearing on exactly. There is a specific provision at the end of the bill that says that lead agencies can't consider environmental justice, and I need to refresh myself on exactly how that works into the nuances of the bill.
Okay, that's a first.
I will be very brief.
Okay.
I will be very brief.
Okay.
So as you heard, there are 3 parts to the bill. The part about considering economic benefit comes in when we say you can't build these very specific types of facilities in these very specific neighborhoods unless There is an overwhelming public interest, and as part of that public interest, we say that you may not consider economic benefit. So I just want to be very clear that this is a very, very narrow piece, in my understanding, of the bill and does not apply broadly throughout the bill. Thank you.
What was your question? No, I'm kidding. Okay. I do agree. Okay, Vice Chair Hunt.
I have a question
Representative Barno.
Just a quick question. I mean, there's a lot of talk about economic benefit, whether or not financial security of people have a direct relation to health outcomes, which I think many of us would agree they do. Do you believe that this policy would delay the development of clean energy projects or projects generally that create jobs?
I will take the first stab at this. I don't think we're, at least from AWB's perspective, as concerned about the clean energy development projects. I think that we see that exemption is fairly clear within the statute. But as far as for the second question, Representative, I think that we do have that concern. I think the requirement of having to do a fairly large-scale environmental justice assessment before even going through the SEPA process of determination of significance or no significance in an area of an overburdened community, which is largely the Puget Sound and other areas within the state, does create a big barrier to overcome for the types of projects and permits necessary for some of the businesses that are not large industrial projects within the bill. So the short answer I would say is yes on that, the second part.
Okay.
Okay, terrific. Let's hear from our next panelists. Thank you very much.
If we could have Scott Hazelgrove, followed by Drew Zabrowski and Ian Morris, and on deck Isaac Kastama, John Flanagan, and Carrie Sessions.
And we're going to move to 60 seconds, not now, but for the next panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Scott Hazelgrove before you today on behalf of the Master Builders of King and Snohomish Counties, one of the country's oldest and largest local home builders association, in opposition to House Bill 1303. To start, I want to thank Representative Mena for the inclusion of the exclusion of housing from the review here. However, we believe that the definition used for housing is fairly narrow and actually would not cover many of the types of housing that you all over the last several years have worked hard to try and promote, which is denser urban infill housing. Specifically, the definition of housing is applied only to residential units. It does not include commercial units. Let me just share a very short story from my neighborhood in West Seattle. We have a development that is a series of townhouses with commercial space below, including Olympia Coffee, including a small winery, a therapist's office, and others. We believe that the inclusion of that kind of commercial development, which creates a lively community, would actually then take those residential housing developments out of the exclusion and would apply this standard. That may be workable for very large projects and affordable for large projects, but the extensive review required is not going to be viable for many smaller projects and would actually frustrate it. So we look forward to working with the sponsor to see if we can address this concern. Thank you.
Drew Zabrowski.
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I had a 90-second version plan, so I'll try to speed through this, but I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and share my thoughts on House Bill 1303. My name is Drew Zabrowski. I am co-founder of Bear Creek Real Estate Partners, a small local private developer of industrial buildings in the Puget Sound. To dive right in, House Bill 1303 is detrimental to our port-based economy. The Northwest Seaport Alliance is a top 7 container gateway in the U.S. and supports over 58,000 jobs and drives $12.4 billion in economic activity in our state. This bill would forever change the development and adaptive reuse process for industrial facilities, which are imperative to our port-based economy. With that said, my specific concerns to House Bill 1303 include 1, a dramatic increase in permitting lead times for not only new projects, but also potentially existing projects that trigger certain ambiguous thresholds. 2, a broad geographic scope of the environmental disparities map, which encompassed nearly every industrial submarket from Arlington to Chehalis, including dedicated industrial land in the ports and the Kent Valley with no immediate proximity to residences. 3rd, vague definitions of potentially impactful projects that are ambiguous in nature could include even the smallest of industrial projects, and that will create uncertainty for lead agencies who, in my experience, often struggle to meet statutory timelines. So in summary, my concerns are that House Bill 1303 creates negative economic impacts for our vital port-based economy by reducing the supply of sufficient industrial facilities, and it should be taken into consideration that the consumer will ultimately bear impacts to a reduction in supply of industrial facilities due to higher rents and longer development costs that will be passed down. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ian Morrison. I apologize for getting your name wrong the first time.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Ian Morrison. I am here on behalf of NAIOP Washington, which is the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. We represent the developers of industrial, office, mixed-use residential, and retail communities throughout the state. In my day job, I'm also a land use attorney, so I have a deep experience of over 15 years of permitting over 100 SEPA processes. And while we have concerns and are opposed to the bill as currently drafted, we appreciate the engagement with the lead sponsor and the continued dialogue. But as proposed, we have some significant concerns because this first seriously upends the permitting process in Washington state. And that derives from the definitions. As you heard from Scott Hazelgrove, much of the mixed-use residential will be included in this. But beyond that, this definition in the bill, which calls for any project in these areas, which is a significant source of air pollution from transportation impacts associated with the project, would go far beyond what New Jersey or other states have done and bring in the opportunity to challenge not only new office facilities at Microsoft's campus, which is a 7 or higher, but also research facilities in South Lake Union or mixed-use TOD projects in Linwood or Federal Way next to the light rail stations. We believe that this bill completely upends the EIS process by putting this whole environmental justice statement before the EIS, depriving the public and the community of the information in the system inside the SEPA process. We would ask for this bill not to move forward as drafted.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair Hunt to bring up the next panel.
Thank you. Our next speakers will be Isaac Kostama, John Flanagan, followed by Carrie Sessions, and we are going to 60 seconds.
And on deck?
On deck, we will have Todd Wildermuth, Celine Lyons, and John Worthington.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Isaac Kostama on behalf of Clean and Prosperous Washington. Testifying as other today, the Climate Commitment Act, Clean Fuel Standard, Move Ahead Washington, and the HEAL Act together form the foundation of a balanced and effective climate framework. We support efforts to embed environmental justice more deeply into project reviews, but we do have concerns about how this proposal interacts with the CCA as it relates to air quality, greenhouse gases, and co-pollutants. Section 5 directs ecology to deny permits for certain facilities, including those likely subject to or that might opt into the Climate Commitment Act. That contradicts language in the CCA that explicitly states in regards to SEPA that covered emissions from an entity that is or will be covered entity under this chapter may not be the basis for denial of a permit in a new or expanded facility. We believe that a key plank of the Climate Commitment Act is proportionate accountability. CAP provides for a managed transition with clear long-term signal where new equipment gradually replaces the old. While the bill exempts clean energy projects from sections 3 and 5, we do favor broadening exemptions for facilities covered by the CCA as it relates to these impacts. The important context is we're struggling to build any type of facility in Washington right now, and clarity and certainty as to where, what, and how these new requirements shall apply is critical.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Dolio, Ranking Member Dye, members of the committee, good morning. For the record, John Flanagan, Senior State Government Relations Manager for the Port of Seattle. I'm testifying other today regarding House Bill 1303. In 2019, the Port of Seattle Commission approved a resolution restating a long-term commitment to equitable investment and engagement throughout the Duwamish Valley, and essentially creating the first real environmental justice policy at the port in our 115-year history to that point. At the time, we were the first port authority in the country to formally partner with the near port community to specifically address environmental justice issues. I think it's fair to say that the Port of Seattle and our commission want to find actionable and realistic strategies to advance the work of achieving environmental justice in our state. And I think it's also fair to say that the port supports the overall intent and the end goals of this legislation. We would oppose, however, some of the methods and processes used in the current draft of the bill to reach those goals and to advance that work. Simply put, I think we agree on the what, but not necessarily on the how. Although the port staff are trying to currently fully assess the effect that the passage of the bill would have, we've identified several areas and we'll continue to work with the sponsor.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Carrie?
Chair Dolio, members of the committee, my name is Carrie Sessions. I work as the Director of Governmental Relations at the Department of Ecology. I've signed in other today to speak to technical input on the bill, and I will not be speaking to policy. The Department of Ecology provides guidance to lead agencies on implementation of SEPA. While the bill incorporates environmental justice into the SEPA process, several elements conflict with established SEPA timelines. For example, the timeline established in Section 3 for the EJIS could exceed the 90-day limit for the SEPA threshold determination. This would pose a challenge for lead agencies undergoing SEPA and for ecology in determining guidance. Also, the prohibition on new air quality permits in Section 5 could prevent necessary upgrades or modifications for existing sources that are required by federal law, and thereby could jeopardize our federal delegated permitting authority. Environmental justice is a core part of Department of Ecology's work. We really appreciate the sponsor's leadership and work on this bill, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, we'll move to the next panel.
The next panel will be Todd Wildermuth, Selena Lyons, and John Worthington. Todd.
Hi, Todd Wildermuth. I teach environmental law at the University of Washington. Not speaking on behalf of the university, just speaking on behalf of myself. Just wanted to give some quick perspective in the larger context of environmental law as to where this fits. We've heard a bunch about how this law has three parts. I'll just say that I see it as doing two important things. One, the SEPA portion. I see SEPA when I teach it and say, you know, SEPA is a promise the state made to everybody in the 1970s that says we will look before we leave. And so I think to one extent, this is just adding environmental justice, which has been an important factor in many laws lately. We are just making that more consistent and adding it to SEPA. The other part is the curbing part, and I just want to highlight that environmental law has not been good at, through its current system of permits generally, of resolving two problems. One, concentrations of pollutants, and two, cumulative impacts of pollutants. This law is one of the few efforts to make an effort at trying to resolve that problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Selena Lyons. All right, we will go to John Worthington.
John Worthington, SQUIM. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. In 2009, they came up with the reparations for colonization to heal a broken relationship. 10 years later, they got the HEAL Act. The Climate Commitment Act is basically a reparations payment. Some of the folks who came in there today, they received $150 billion for overburdened communities to build a sound transit corridor that has to be filled. But yet they want to come in and develop in places that the Growth Management Act for Seattle and King County don't really want them to be. So without tracking jet stream factors, how does a coastal community claim to be overburdened by pollution that's east through a 700-mile-an-hour jet stream? They couldn't, I disputed the map, they couldn't show their sources. They don't track the shipping emissions. If you move people in to where we manufacture or where we farm, we got to get more stuff from a ship that creates more emissions. So all they're really doing is helping create more shipping emissions. That's
Thank you, John. If you could wrap up. Thanks.
Madam Chair, I understand that Selena Lyons is with us remotely, so I'd like to go back to her.
Sorry, apologies for the delay. I'm Selena Lyons, Community Development Director for the City of Covington, and a lot of what I had in my talking points was already spoken to by the folks from the counties and from master builders. So what I'm going to say is that in Covington, in particular, a suburban city transitioning towards urban growth, infrastructure projects like sewer expansion or water improvements often exceed the exemptions that are outlined in this bill, which add delay, costs, and impact housing affordability. So I'm asking the legislators to expand exemptions to include infrastructure, making it very clear sewer and water facilities are exempt. This should extend to projects where cities collaborate with DOT, especially when these projects are identified in the comprehensive plan, and then really bridging that correlation between the comp plan, because current mandates have requested that cities evaluate climate vulnerability impacts, social justice, and GMA equity requirements. So we are building this in already upstream. And any way that we can look at streamlining that SEPA process is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call up our final speakers, Elizabeth Dickinson, Claire Richards, followed by Charlie Thompson and Kelly Campbell. Elizabeth.
It'll be just a moment. They're being pulled into the room.
Okay, please proceed.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Dickinson, and I am representing the 172 faith communities and thousands of individuals statewide who belong to the Faith Action Network. We urge you to quickly and resoundingly pass House Bill 1303. Many in our network, as well as Indigenous communities with whom we partner, live in areas where they experience a cumulative and disproportionate share of pollution, toxic chemicals, and the impacts of climate change without necessarily benefiting economically. Their health, life expectancy, and quality of life are excessively harmed. You can find these impacted communities around the state, both urban and rural. Our spiritual traditions call us to seek equity and care for those most vulnerable, so we believe that the permitting process for facilities should take into account the disproportionate suffering communities already experience, and the voices of those who have been impacted for decades need to be heard in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Claire Richards.
Hello?
We can hear you, Claire.
Okay. Good morning, members of the committee, Madam Chair. My name is Dr. Claire Richards. I am a nursing professor and study planetary health. I am speaking on behalf of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility to ask you to support HB1303, the CURB Act. Overburdened communities have more health problems and shorter life expectancy than people in less polluted communities. Air pollution affects nearly all organs of the body across the entire lifespan, leading to serious lung diseases like asthma, COPD, and lung cancer, and can worsen cardiovascular disease, leading to both heart attacks and brain attacks. It causes infertility, preterm labor, and low birth weight, as well as accelerated cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. The CURB Act makes the invisible visible by making knowledge about the cumulative risks available via environmental justice impact statements and requires transparency in the environmental permitting process. This will result in cleaner air and healthier communities with fewer deaths, asthma attacks, and better mental health. This is a great reason for the legislature to take action. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Our final speaker will be Charlie Thompson.
Hi again, everyone. I'm Charlie Thompson with the Northwest Energy Coalition here in support of House Bill 1303, which builds on the 2021 HEAL Act, and thank you, Rep. Mena. The CURB Act's requirement to consider health impacts from unregulated pollutants prioritizes public health. Specifying communities that have been disproportionately impacted ensures they receive safeguards they deserve after decades of neglect. The bill's requirement for environmental justice impact statements is forward-thinking, as it illuminates what a traditional environmental impact statement cannot. By analyzing a broader and more cumulative scope of impacts, we gain a more accurate understanding of how proposed projects could worsen existing environmental burdens on real people. We're beginning to see Washington push for procedural justice in many arenas. The CURB Act offers another opportunity to do so by elevating frontline voices in the permitting process so they have direct say in what is impacting their health and environment. Turning our attention to health and justice and acting on it is really needed right now, really needed. So while you've heard a mix of thoughts and particular details, I believe most people here are supportive of the intent, and NWEC encourages you to continue to work and support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will now close the hearing on 1303, and if we could have staff brief the amendments on 1024, 1018, and 1154, please. He's on it.
Thank you, Chair Dolio and members of the committee.
My name is Srinandan Ramachandran, and I'm an intern for this committee. Representative Kloba has proposed an amendment to HB 1024. As a reminder, this bill increases the maximum lease length for St. Edward State Park from 62 years to 80 years. This amendment restores the requirement that leases at St. Edward State Park are limited to the main seminary building, pool building, the gymnasium, adjacent parking lots, and associated nearby property. There are no proposed amendments for HB 1018.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. And how about 1154, Matt?
Thank you, Chair Dolio. Matt Sterling, staff to the committee. Briefly, House Bill 1154 authorizes the Department of Ecology to suspend a permit and impose civil penalties for a solid waste handling facility that's operating in violation of any solid waste management requirements, and requires each local jurisdictional health department to provide ecology with a list of violations of the requirements for solid waste handling facilities for each facility. There is one proposed substitute in the EBB, H-0785.1 by Rep. Dorr. Briefly, the proposed substitute makes a number of changes to the underlying bill by requiring that permits for landfilling must be approved by the Department of Ecology after August 1st, 2027 to be valid rather than August 1st, 2025 under the current bill. It provides that the authority for a jurisdictional health department and ecology to issue civil penalties would be restricted to $5,000 rather than $10,000 per day for the first 14 days of operation. If the issue is not resolved after 14 days, the penalty could then be increased to $10,000 per day. The proposed substitute would require civil penalties levied by a JHD to be deposited in the local treasury into the account from which the JHD's expenses were paid, and civil penalties levied by ecology to be deposited in the model toxics control operating account. The proposed substitute would require a JHD to attempt to reach compliance with solid waste handling facilities through education and outreach prior to issuing a civil penalty, and provides that a JHD may send a written notice to ecology that's deferring to ecology's enforcement authority. It would authorize ecology to exercise enforcement authority when a JHD has not deferred enforcement if ecology determines that the JHD's enforcement response had failed to adequately address any violations. The proposed substitute provides that a civil penalty imposed by a JHD may be appealed to the local health officer, and a civil penalty imposed by ecology may be appealed to the Pollution Control Hearings Board. The proposed substitute requires the JHD to report a list of any current violations by solid waste facilities operating in a jurisdiction to ecology rather than a list of both current and historical violations. And lastly, the proposed substitute makes conforming amendments to give the PCHB authority to hear an appeal of a civil penalty issued by ecology.
Great. So you work to harmonize the relationship between the jurisdictional health department and the and ecology, which was kind of the biggest thing I heard in the hearing.
So among the changes, the proposed substitute delineates in terms of where civil penalties go. It also changes the appeals process for a civil penalty issued by a JHD would be going to that local health officer
Okay.
as opposed to an ecology penalty, which would go to the PCHB.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, where are we headed? Who's got that information?
There are caucus rooms for Democrats in JLab B12 and Republicans in B18.
B18, B12 and B18. Okay. Okay, we may not be able to do this, but we'll try and come back. I don't think we're going to be able to have time. 10. If we come back at 10 till, we'd have 5 minutes and maybe get one out. We'll try. If not. All right. This meeting's adjourned. We're going to adjourn on time. Not early this time. Well, 2 minutes early. Sorry.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah,